In this episode, Allie's breaking down how to make your book work for your business instead of draining your time and money. You'll learn what really makes a book good and marketable, how to align it with your goals, and the truth about publishing without the overwhelm and, frankly, the BS. So, if you've ever had write a book sitting on your vision or to do list, go grab a coffee or a glass of wine and get ready because this episode is packed with gold. Welcome to the Fox Talks Business Podcast. I'm your host, Tanya Fox, money mentor, business coach, and author. If you're a business owner who's been around the block but still feels stuck in the financial fog or hustling without getting real results, well, you're in the right place. Each week, I'm going to dive into money mastery, mindset shifts, and real-world strategies to help you grow and profit sustainably. You're going to hear unfiltered conversations, bold ideas, and practical, proven ways to start growing your business. So if you're ready to break past the plateau, make more, stress less, and have fun doing it, let's dive in. Foxy listeners, many of you have written in because you are thinking about writing a book, or some of you even said you wrote one and it didn't do any good for you and you needed help with that. And as always, I promise you, if I'm not the person to find it, I'm going to find the right one. And I found Ally for you. So, Ally, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here, Tanya.
So we're going to be talking about, I said this in the intro when we're coming in, but we're going to be talking all about books and writing and publishing and all of that other stuff. Before we get into everything that everybody's going to want to make notes on, give us a little bit of background on who you are.
Yeah, so I'm the CEO and founder of the Writers Ally. I've been in book publishing for, gosh, like 25 years now, which is insane every time I say it out loud. And everybody asks me right after I say that, well, what did you do? Get started when you were 12? Like, how have you been in this business so long? And the truth is kind of, yeah, like I've been a book nerd and I've loved books and reading and writing literally my entire life. It's been a lifelong passion of mine. My mom loves to tell the story of how I used to make little construction paper and crayon books when I was a toddler, and I would give them out to people and say I was publishing books. I was a book publisher. Um, I was reading at the age of 3 because I got frustrated. Mom wouldn't read to me often as I liked. So, it's really just been something that's always been a part of my life. Did all the usual, academic writing stuff, creative writing, literary magazines, school paper, blah, blah, blah. And when I was in college, I was really fortunate to get a internship with a small regional publisher, which was my first real experience in book publishing. Because it was so small and I was the only intern, I got to do a lot of things. I got to have my fingers sort of in all the pots and really see how all the different aspects of publishing a book comes together. And then,
Right.
of course, I was incredibly, incredibly lucky, and I got my first real job at Simon and Schuster, one of the big five, when I graduated.
That's a good place to to start off your career.
Yeah,
So
yeah, it sure was.
yeah. And I know, so this is a big thing. And we're hearing about this more and more these days, that especially for, people who, are in their business, they're starting their own business, that, writing a book is something that can set you out. We hear this when people are starting to speak. I know I heard that a lot when I was sort of at, years ago when I was getting into speaking, they would say, if you have a book, it's easier, it's easier to get on stage, and and then you're like, oh, what does it need to be about? And they're like, oh, we just need you to have the title of author. And I thought, this is really weird. But I think what stops a lot of people is, of course, there's a lot that goes into actually writing a book, but how to actually make it work for your business. Because I think a lot of times people are like, I don't know what to write about.
Yeah.
I want to write something. The majority of our listeners are, entrepreneurs and self-employed. So they're like, how do I even decide? So let's talk about that first. How do you decide? One, yes, you should write a book, and two, you have something to put in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the first question I think is one of the most important questions. They're both really important, of course, but I think it's important because there is this sort of myth, as you described, that somehow just the act of writing a book suddenly helps you to grow your business, suddenly gets you on stages, just opens up all of these doors. And it is absolutely true that a book can do all of those things for your business. A book can be an incredibly powerful tool. in your business growth toolkit. But it can't just be any book. It has to be the right book. And it has to be the right time. There are many times where we speak to clients who come to us. One really great example, woman I spoke to a little less than a year ago, great credibility, tons of experience in the corporate world, had decided to shift over into coaching. Pretty common story.
Right.
She came to us because naturally everyone was telling her, well, you need to have a book. And she also really wanted to do this online course. And so she was telling us about all the stuff that was going on in her business and how the book sort of fit into it. And through the conversation, it became really clear that her most pressing issue was actually income. She needed to start generating money and she needed to start generating it pretty quickly. And of course, a book, as you mentioned, is a huge investment of time and energy, and it takes a while. So through this conversation, for her at that point in her business, we actually were able to help her see that it did not make sense to write a book just yet. For her, the best next step was actually to pursue that online course, that subject that she wanted to turn into a really important part of her business. The online course was going to start as a hybrid, then she was going to branch off into one-to-one coaching. And of course, her work in doing the course would not only bring her income, but it would also help her to grow an audience, which would then later help her to support a book launch. And most importantly, she was going to be able to test out her ideas and her theories and her systems and her processes with real people. So inevitably, whatever book she was going to write a year or two down the road is going to be a much, much better, meatier, more robust book than it ever could have been if she had written it right off the start. So that's the first thing, right? Should you really write a book? Is it really the right time for your book?
Right,
Um,
because it's not true, you don't write it and they come.
that's absolutely
Kind
right.
of thing.
Yes. Yes, we call it the field of dreams
Yeah.
mentality. If I write it, they will come. If the book is good enough,
Yeah, people will
people
just
will
find
find
it.
it.
Yeah,
And it's
absolutely.
really sadly untrue. It's really sadly untrue. It's 100% untrue. If the tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, nobody finds the tree.
Yeah,
It's
right.
just, so yeah, there is that question. So when is it a good time to write a book? When you've been in business for a little while. And that can look different for everybody. I say about 1 to 2 years minimum, only because usually it takes a person starting a business at least a year or two to get better clarity on precisely who it is they serve, exactly what kinds of problems they're solving for that audience. They get a much clearer sense of what it is their messaging and positioning is like. All of the things that go into making a really great book will be easier if you spent a little time working those things out in your actual business with actual people for a little while. So that's the first thing. You want to have actually been in business. This idea of, well, I just started a business, so I should write a book to help me grow my business. It generally doesn't work.
Yeah. And I usually say you have to lose the honeymoon phase, right? Like I always
Yeah.
think of like I started off in accounting and I always used to think of like, the person who buys a sports bar and thinks, I'm going to date myself, but is like, oh, it's going to be like Cheers, it's going to be great. I'm going to sit and talk with everybody and I'm like, oh, you are going to get a rude awakening. Right? And then they realize
Right.
the staff and people being drunk and like all the other stuff that goes with it. And they're like, oh my God, right? The rose colored glasses kind of come off.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So all of those things, you want to be past a little bit of all of that in your business. And the other thing that's really important, if it's about creating a book that will bring you results, right? We're not just talking about a legacy project, an ego
Right.
project, a book that's actually going to do something for your business. It's also really good to get to a point where you can be very clear about what that is. And this sort of feeds into the second question you asked, which is how do I know what to write about?
Right.
When you write that book, many people will sit down to write a book from some kind of internal, external motivation. It's somebody telling them, oh, you should write a book. You need to write a book. Or they have some idea that they've had, some creative idea has bubbled up. There's something they want to say. There's something interesting that they think they want to share. It's usually how most people get started writing a book. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. But the next step has to be connecting that idea or connecting that desire to write a book to whatever goals you want that book to achieve. The
Okay.
strategy is really important if you want the book to actually do something instead of just sitting in your Zoom background gathering virtual dust. So, what do you want that book to achieve specifically? What do you want to use it for? Using a book let's just say as a lead magnet that you're going to, partner with a bunch of people and give away thousands of copies of books so that all of those people end up on your mailing list because you're trying to grow up a community so that you can then later sell something to them, which is an approach that many of our clients have taken. That kind of book is going to be a little bit different than a book that you might write to get you on big stages, to be a
Right.
well-paid keynote speaker, right? To be some kind of big, like Tony Robbins type inspirational kind of Brene Brown figure. They're not going to be the same book. They might have ideas in common, but the format, the length, the way that you publish it, the way that you market it are all going to be a little bit different. So you want to have clarity on what exactly you want the book to do for you before you finish it, hopefully before you've even written too much of it, because it's really going to shape what goes into that book.
Well, and I think having guidance, because I think what often happens, and I know this from experience of writing my own book, is it one of the most difficult things was sort of stepping outside of I know this information, right? Was going, I it's so hard to kind of go, well, this stuff seems like second nature to me, right? We all do
Right.
that, especially when we're very good, when we're an expert at our craft. We're like, well, this is just like common sense, right? Because we've been doing it so much. But when you're writing,
Absolutely.
you're really writing for somebody who knows nothing, and I don't mean that as an insult, but just like, how are you doing this that other people are going to be like, oh, yes, this makes perfect sense to me because I don't have your 25 years of experience in my head.
Right. No, absolutely. And even that speaks to that same point about understanding what exactly you want the book to do for you. Because once you're clear about that, the next step is to think about who are the people that I need to reach in order to make that goal happen. And you just hit on a really important point. Sometimes the people you're writing for are total beginners. They don't know what you're trying to teach them, or maybe you're trying to change their mind about something and they haven't been exposed to the research or the experience that you've been exposed to in order to have them have that kind of paradigm shift or that mental shift. Sometimes, though, you're writing for a more advanced audience, right? Maybe you're writing for C-suite leaders. You're again not going to write the same kind of book for somebody who's successfully started and sold $5 million multi-million dollar companies as a book you might be writing for somebody who's just starting their first company, right? That's going to dictate the content. So what do you want the book to achieve? Who are the people you really need to reach as what we call your ideal reader or your target audience? Who are those folks that you need to reach to achieve that goal? And then one more step in the backwards engineering is what do those people want and need to hear from me? So we have that really important shift of I started writing this book because of me, something I wanted to say, something I think people need to hear. And now you have to find kind of marry that passion, that impulse to what does the audience actually want? Because nobody buys a book based on what you think they need to hear, right?
Right.
They buy it based on what they need help with, what they think the problem is, what they're looking for. So you have to be able to connect all three of those dots to have a book that really, really works for your business.
And do you find that oftentimes entrepreneurs get stuck at that point because they'll say, but I know that this is, and I say this all the time because I deal with it, in the work that I do, that people are like,
Sure.
this is the problem I have, which I never come out and go, no, it's not. But like, because I know you think that's your problem, but I know that is not the solution we're going down, but that's okay.
Right.
And so there's that kind of like shift that sort of needs to happen where you go, yes, I need to address this in a way that they're going to go, oh my God, that's me. That's exactly what it is that I'm looking for. And I mean, in this, I'm addressing mostly nonfiction,
Sure.
obviously,
Of course.
that you're like, yes, that's the problem that I'm having. And then you can sort of lead them to what the actual issue is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That happens a lot. Just as it happens in coaching, it happens in books for the same reason, because people have in their mind what the issue is. And that may or may not actually be the problem. They're only operating with their frame of reference and their experience, which is why you end up seeking out somebody who has more experience than you, right? So they can see the things that you can't see. So sometimes, yes, a book can sort of have that trick, but you still have to lead them in with what they think the problem is. You still have to lead them in with maybe not the problem. If it's that kind of scenario, sometimes you can just go right for the emotions, right? You don't have to
Right.
address the problem necessarily head on, but if you feel like they're trying to solve one problem and you're saying that's not actually the problem, you at least have to get into, well, how do they feel about the problem? Like, what is the thing that they're trying to solve that problem to get to and still leverage those things to draw them in, because you're never going to get the chance to explain to them why they're wrong about the problem if you don't bring them in with the thing they're actually looking for first.
Right. So I want to demystify, because I think this is a big thing. People are like, yeah, I think I have a lot to say. I'm going to sit down and, I'm going to write this book. And, and I've heard it lots of times from people that they're like, I'm just going to write this. It's October now. Oh, this will be like great for Christmas. So, which I actually just heard the other day. So
We get a
let's
lot of those calls this time of year too.
yeah, I want this to be cool. So let's talk about, what timeline should people be putting in their heads if they're like, okay, I feel like there's something here. They've listened to you. They're like, okay, I know like who it is that I want to reach out to. I know what it is that I want to talk about. I know that I have to offer this. What is like a time frame or like a timeline that people should consider of being on when they do this project?
Yeah. So, I'll give the caveat that everyone's different, and certainly
Absolutely.
some people are better writers than others. Some people have more clarity than others. All of those caveats given. Generally speaking, the writing process can take almost any amount of time, especially if it's your first book.
Right.
The production process is a little easier to pin down. So, from the point that the manuscript is completely finalized, it says everything that you want it to say. It takes about 3 to 4 months to do the copy editing, the design, the layout, the proofreading, the administrative setup, all the little things you have to do behind the scenes to make, computer files available for sale online as a book. And theoretically, during that period or even earlier, you're also laying the groundwork for whatever marketing efforts are going to come once the book is actually out. So if you figure at least 4 months generously to produce the book, then you have to add on to that whatever time it takes you to actually write and then develop the book. And, I will tell new authors to give themselves 1 to 2 years for that process altogether, um, unless there is something very, very real and very, very pressing that they need to rush for. If they have some enormous opportunity coming up in 6 months that they absolutely need to capitalize on, this can all be done more quickly by cutting certain parts of the aspect, which is why in those cases I really encourage people to speak to a consultant so they can make sure that they are cutting the right things and not skipping things that are really going to hurt them. It usually also involves writing a certain type of book, a much shorter book, a much narrower focused book. If expediency is the goal, then you make different choices. But unless you really have that pressing thing that you must meet, your mother's birthday coming up, the anniversary of your father's death, like these are not quote unquote real constraints.
Yeah.
Give yourself time, because once that book is out there, it's almost impossible to make it go away. You can't just unpublish a book. We've had clients try. It is very, very difficult to make a book go away once it's out there. And it's better to give yourself the time that you need to do a good job, to do the right job, because it is a lot of time and energy and emotional, burden and money as well. So why rush that process?
Well, and I think that gives like a good idea for people to go, okay, I'm going to like look at this over, like you said, like a 1 to 2 year, I always say two. I'm like, give yourself 2 years, because and I think there's different, so sort of stages. And it's why I wanted to bring this up. I remember sitting in a room with a bunch of different authors, and there was nonfiction and fiction, and there was like, there was just like all different kind of genres. And I remember going like, I really do. And I kind of, people were looking at me weird. And I go, I think there's different level of authors. Because let me tell you, as a nonfiction business book author,
Right.
I do not have the same skill set as a fiction author.
Oh, it's completely
When
different.
I
Completely
see the
different.
timelines that you guys have to figure out and keep everything straight, it is hella different. Like you
Very.
guys are on a whole other level. And even within there, there's whole other levels of people who have maps and timelines. And, like I'm like, oh
Absolutely.
God, how do you keep all of this stuff straight? Right. So I think it's, and obviously we want whatever it is that we're producing and putting out, especially like when you said it's something that this is not going to go away.
Right.
When you put this out there, this is going to kind of be that naked photo that just creeps up back up, even if you don't want it to. You
That's
want to
right.
really take that time to make sure that you're creating something that you're going to be proud of, and that you're going to be okay that, could resurface over and over again.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, like I said, there are definitely people who can do it faster. We have a client who's been in business for decades. He writes a ton of content. He's already written numerous books. It probably takes him 3 months to write a book, but he's
Right.
writing a book that's about 25,000 words. It's incredibly specific. It's very narrow in focus. He's very strategic in planning his books to be the top end of a funnel that's ultimately going to lead to an offer. The whole thing is planned out. So when you're writing that kind of book and you have that kind of experience, yeah, he can turn off a book in 3 months and it's going to be great. That's not everybody's situation,
Yeah. Especially when it's your first.
especially when it's your first.
So, let's say we've got somebody and they're like, okay, I've got the person I'm writing for, the topic that I'm writing for, I'm taking the time, I'm doing all of that. Now I'm sort of ready. When it gets to the actual publishing, I know that there is so much, and I mean, I came across this, and I heard this a lot in people who were asking for this episode, is that there's just so many myths out there, especially as self-publishing, sorry,
Yeah.
is sort of gaining traction. Can you talk to us about some of the differences between traditional and self-publishing, and maybe kind of give us sort of a clearer pathway that we can eventually go down when
Yeah.
they're trying to head down that path?
Absolutely. I talk about this a lot, as you can imagine. It is a very common question. So the first thing is let's talk about what paths you have available generally, right?
Okay.
So there is traditional publishing, which is typically you get an agent, and the agent helps you to sell your book to a book publisher. You get what we call a traditional book deal, and then you have a contract with that publisher. On the other opposite end of the spectrum, we have what we would call fully DIY self-publishing. True self-publishing, where you as the author figure out and do all the things. You write the book, you design your cover, you upload the files, you do your marketing, you really do everything. And then in between those, we have sort of two half steps. We have what we call hybrid publishing, which has really emerged over the last 10 years or so, I think, in the most serious way. And now there are a number of really legitimate, really interesting hybrid publishers out there. Hybrid publishers are like traditional publishers in the sense that they are discerning about what they publish. So it's not a pay to play, right? You have to submit and be accepted.
Okay.
And they have that process because they make their money both on selling books, the way a traditional publisher does, and also on subsidizing their production process from the author. So in traditional publishing, the author pays nothing. The publisher is basically the like venture capitalist who invests in your book,
Right.
and they take on all of the burden and you get paid later. In hybrid publishing, you pay a certain amount of money towards the production of the book, and the hybrid publisher then contributes the labor, the connections, etc., and pays you a royalty on the back end. So they're making money both off the author and off the sale of the book. The other half step is between total DIY and hybrid, which is what we do. We call it supported indie publishing. And that's where you, as a self publisher, still retain control. You are still the publisher, and you basically either work with a team like us, which is pre-assembled and everything you need in one place, or you put together your own team, but you're hiring professionals. You're not doing all the things yourself.
Right.
You're hiring the cover designer, you're hiring the ad person, whatever it is that you're doing. And those two options in the middle give really a lot more options than we had even 5 to 10 years ago. So people can choose any one of those four paths. And there are a lot of different criteria that goes into it, but some of the easiest ones to knock right off the top. Traditional publishing takes forever. Like
Right.
it just takes forever. Even in the best case scenario, if you send your submissions out and you get an agent, let's say within 6 months, then the agent has to start submitting your proposal or your manuscript to publishers. That could take another 6 months to a year. Not uncommon. to take that long for a publisher to make a deal. Now they've made you an offer, you've accepted the offer. Well, now you have to negotiate the contracts.
Right.
That often takes another 1 to 3 months. Now you've signed the contracts, right? So by the time your book actually comes out, it is often 2 to 3 years from the point that you started submitting, if you're lucky. It's just a long process.
Right.
Traditional publishing also has, honestly, some bars that most authors don't meet. I use a baseball analogy. I talk about publishing being like the major leagues, right?
Right.
It is the, let's say, top 1% of all authors. And it doesn't mean that there aren't other talented authors or good books, right? In baseball, you have farm leagues, you have minor leagues, you have college ball, you have plenty of extremely talented people that will never make it to that very, very elite top narrow percent. And traditional publishing is the same way. They want people with large platforms. They want people at a very high writing skill. They want people with manuscripts that they feel tap into trends or something that is, going on in the zeitgeist that they can really hook into from a publicity perspective. So there are many reasons why they might or might not accept a book that really don't have anything to do with the book itself being a quote unquote good book, which is why all of these other avenues have emerged to give people the options. And now I'm really happy to say, self-publishing has really been a thing for, gosh, definitely more than 10 years, maybe going on 20 years at this point, almost since POD technology came out in the early 2000s. So um, it really is a very viable option now in a way that it wasn't just a couple of decades ago.
Well, and I think too, to go the traditional publishing route, like you said, you're kind of meeting all of these criteria because obviously the company is like, hey, well, like we're footing the bill on this. So we want to make sure that we're going to be making, a ton of money off of you. So you're kind of like selling yourself.
Yeah,
We're
absolutely.
like, having to sell yourself. Whereas, like you said, doing the hybrid steps, step like what you offer as the step up from DIY, you have a little bit more ability to sort of build that audience with what you're doing as you sort of go along.
Absolutely. And there's a real question of scale here too, Tanya. When you are traditionally publishing, part of the reason they need that bar to be so high is A, they're making all of their money off of book sales.
Right.
And B, they need to sell thousands of copies to make up the overhead for what they require to run the kind of business they run. When you, as a business owner, decide to publish a book, you don't have the same kind of overhead. And even though, yes, of course, you write a book, you publish a book, you want to sell books, you're not in the business of selling books,
Right.
right? You're in the business of selling coaching packages or courses or widgets or whatever it is. And the book is a tool to help you do that. So a lot of people make the mistake of looking traditional publishing and trying to copy what they do. And while there are things that you can learn certainly from big established publishers, it really is a very different ballgame.
So let's talk a little bit more when someone comes specifically to work with a company like yours, because I think that's where most people are. Because let me tell you right now, I will, I know everybody tries to be diplomatic, but I don't have to be. I'm telling you, don't self publish, totally DIY. Like it is like, I remember looking at some of the stuff and I like remember going, I don't want to do this. And if you're an entrepreneur, like you're just adding 7 jobs to the top of what you
It's
need to do.
true.
Let me tell
Yeah.
you, like it just don't do it. So I'm okay with saying that. So I think that and and I think that going somebody like your route where you still have control, but talk about like when somebody comes in so they understand sort of what happens. What do they have control of? What do they need to think of when they're coming to somebody like you?
Yeah, absolutely. So in our model, we like to think of ourselves as your outsourced publishing team. So if you are the publisher, we are your ready-made staff that you just come to, but you are still very much in control. We inform you at every step of the way. We try our best to save our clients from themselves if necessary. Sometimes you just don't know what you don't know, and that's what we're here for. But it is absolutely always the client's choice. It is a work for hire service. We have no ongoing control or right to the book. So it's not a royalty situation. Everything is a flat fee for service, clear up front. In my particular case, we always start with a kind of strategy session I think one of the things that makes us really different from a lot of services like ours is there are a lot of companies that will take whatever draft that you give them, and as long as you're paying for it, they'll do their best to dress it up and make it look nice and publish it, but they don't put a lot of thought and energy into what happens next.
Right.
They're helping you to, their one job is to take what you've given them and publish a book that looks as good as it possibly can be. But if what's happening with the content and all the ways we've been talking about already isn't nailed down first, it's kind of that I hate this phrase, but it's that putting lipstick on a pig kind of a thing, right? You can
Right.
make a book look really great, but it's only on the surface. If what's working in the content isn't working, you're not going to get those results. So we take a lot of pride in having a developmental stage as part of our process. We don't just take a draft and clean it up and publish it. We really talk to the clients about what their business is. What do you want this book to do in the world? I always ask, it's one of the first questions I ask is what is your vision for this book beyond just selling books, right? What do you want to see
Right.
happen? And we make sure at every stage that the content, the design, the cover copy, and ultimately, if we're working with them on marketing, we don't always, depends on the client. All of those things are dialed into what the client is trying to accomplish. But they always have the right to ignore us. If the editor tells them, listen, you said you want to do this thing, and I think this section is really a problem. You need to like change this. And they're like, no, you know, okay, right? Like we're going to make our best
Yeah.
argument. We're always going to try. We do always push back a little. I encourage my team to push back. I say, listen, you're the expert. That's what they're paying for, but it's not a fight. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it. It's your book.
But I think it's also helpful when to have somebody like that on your team, because of course, when you don't have anybody like that that's on your team, you go to what you traditionally do and whatever. You give it to your mom. I mean, I did this. I gave it to my mom just because my mom reads everything, right? Like, and I was like, tell me if I'm like out to lunch. But my mom also hasn't been like, right? She doesn't, what it was didn't apply to her, right? And
Right.
our friends and everything will always tell the friend truth, I call it, that they're like, yeah,
Yeah.
like it was really good, right? But
Right.
having somebody who can, really, dig into the depths of it and go, okay, like I didn't understand this, I don't know what you're saying, you need to rework with, that's really really helpful to make sure, like we had talked about earlier, that what you're putting out there is going to be understandable to a general audience, and especially those who don't know you, because ideally, or you
Right.
typically, a person who picks up a book, like you don't know who the author is or what they think or the work that they've done. You're just like, okay, this is my first introduction to whoever this, person is.
Right.
Um, and how the cover works. That's how we buy all of these books that are, behind me on the shelf. It was,
Yeah.
just kind of, you liked the cover or whatever, you like what was written. So I
Yeah.
think that's like a key thing.
Yeah, it's very key. It's funny when I speak at a lot of writers' conferences, and I'm semi-famous for telling people, you must get objective feedback on your work, and it can't be someone who's legally obligated to be nice to
Right.
you. Right? It can't, I mean, in the very beginning, look, we all have egos that need nurturing. In the very beginning, if the first person who has ever seen your work is your spouse or a parent or a friend, there's nothing wrong with that. Let them make you feel that it's not total trash. Right? Like let them make you feel that you're not crazy, that you've written something that's interesting, that's good. Absolutely take that step, but don't stop there because first of all, they are not objective, as you said, right? It's the friend truth. No matter how well-intentioned they are, it's just not going to be the same kind of feedback. And more importantly, probably that person doesn't represent your target audience and also probably doesn't have the expertise to really address the content or the journey of the book. So back to like what we were saying earlier, your friend might be able to tell you that it reads well and that they enjoyed it, but they're not going to have the expertise to tell you, okay, this is the kind of book that's going to get you to this goal that you set.
Right. Or even that, yes, this is marketable if you're, meeting
Yeah.
somebody who's like a coach, because that's like a whole different thing that's out there in regards to like colors and how it sits on a shelf. And like there is so much that I think people who are writing a book don't think about. Can you have writing on your spine? How many words does that need to be? Like I remember these questions of going, I didn't even think I would ever have to consider this, right? But
Yeah.
having somebody who can ask you these questions that you're like, oh, I never, yeah, it really is important for me to have a spine big enough, that you can write on because of how it looks on a shelf and blah, like those things that Would anybody think of that? Like, I wouldn't think of it had somebody have not asked me that question previously.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think publishing is a really big example of that whole you don't know what you don't know thing. We see this kind of surface level version of what we think it means to write and publish a book, but there's so much that's going on behind the scenes that you just don't know if you haven't actually been involved in that process before.
Right. So you also, so we talked a little bit. We're going to have all of the links that people can go to find more about you. But you've also started something else of a mastermind. Talk to us a little bit about what this is, like, and who this would be ideally for.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the Author Advantage Mastermind is linked very intimately to a book by the same title that I am also currently writing, Shoemaker's Children. I've helped so many other people publish their books. I'm finally getting around to my own. Um, and the idea of both the book and the mastermind is that there are so many people out there who put in the time and energy and money to create this book, and they have published this book and they're proud of it and they're excited about it and they have a big launch, or maybe they didn't have a launch at all. And now here we are, and they don't know what to do with it, right? The
Right.
book is, as I said earlier, it's sitting in their Zoom background. Maybe they put it in their email signature, but that's about it. Because everyone tells you you need to have a book, but nobody tells you what to do with it once you have it. So,
Right.
what I want to do is I want to help authors really understand how to take that book and how to leverage it as a tool to understand that the value of their book is not the cover price. It's not about, let me sell this book one copy at a time. It's about, how do I use this book to get those clients for the $10,000 coaching package? How do I use this book to get myself booked on more stages? How do I use this to introduce myself to more corporations so I can get hired for retreats? Whatever it is you want to do, I want to show them in that mastermind exactly how to leverage the book to achieve those goals so that they can really see the ROI from all of their hard work.
And can this be somebody, even if they have, like, say they have a book that's out, but that wasn't done like through you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It does not have to be our clients. What I'm looking for in the group is, of course, people who have published a book that does actually meet this criteria that
Right.
we've been
Of
talking
course.
about. The book does have to meet a professional standard, and most importantly, it does have to be tied into what they're offering or want to be offering in their business. If they've done all of that work properly, then it's pretty easy for me to then show them. This is the don't know part, right? To show them how to now take it and go to the next level and use it for all of these different purposes.
And is there a particular like type, like I said, most of our listeners are entrepreneurs and stuff. Is there like a typical, like, do you typically work with, because I know that's something that comes up. Let me preface this by explaining. A lot
Okay.
of people had that wrote in that wanted about the show had said, like, some of them had said, look, I went kind of the route where it was that hybrid. It was like a publishing company. They helped me do the book, do the editing, do the cover art, and everything like that. But when it came to actually marketing, I did like go and use it, but they didn't understand how a business world worked. And
Right.
so I felt like I was let down in that genre because a lot of the stuff that they, like one lady, I remember her email because she was like, a lot of the stuff they offered, I was like, I've been doing this for 25 years. Yes, I know how to start an Instagram page. She goes, but this was the shit that they were sending me.
Uh, yeah.
So I know that is a concern that's going to come up.
Yeah, I mean, there are basics that you want to have in place, which really goes very back to the beginning of the conversation where we talked about, when is the right time in your business to write a book in the first place? And for all of those reasons, selling a book in some respects is like selling anything else. It is a business. It is a product that you're selling. So mailing lists are involved, and platforms are involved, and partnerships and affiliates are involved, and all of these different advertising, all of these things can come into play. So for our purposes, yeah, like I'm not teaching people basic, like let's set up your Facebook page. I'm teaching people, okay, you wrote this book because you wanted to be a speaker. Let's show you now how to take the book and start taking the steps to use that book to get you speaking opportunities. I want it to be, it's really practical, and the book is meant to be the same way. I'm writing it as a kind of playbook. I want people not just to be inspired in seeing all of the possibilities, which I hope will encourage more people to write books and to write them appropriately and correctly in the way that we're talking about, but also to show them how to actually do these things. Because there are so many things that you can do that a book can either make easier, make it faster, or just make that thing have better results.
Oh, I love that. And having the right people in place. So, if, you know, like I said before, we're going to make sure that we have all of the links to where people find. Now, we also have a special link that you have gotten just for our listeners, and talk about what they're going to find when they go to this link with
Yeah,
the
it's
training.
offers.thewritersally.com/Fox Talks Business. And what it's going to take them to is a evergreen webinar called Don't Write the Wrong Book. It's very much in keeping with what we've been talking about. It's about 25 minutes. It talks about what it means to write the right book, how to avoid writing the wrong book, and then it walks them through a really simple 5-step process to start thinking about what the right book, write the it leads them through a very simple process of how to write the right book for their purposes and their goals.
I love that. So we're going to make sure we have that in the show notes. I encourage you all to head down there. And I want to hear from you guys. I want to know, what was your key takeaway for this? Or what was your biggest like light bulb or inspiration moment? Because I want to share that with Ally as well. And we want to hear it. Thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing your wisdom. I think there was so much here. I know everybody probably has notes and ideas that they're like, okay, this is it. This is the time.
Oh, I'm so glad. And anybody listening, I mean, please check out the webinars, sign up for my list. I do open Q&As once a month. I'd love to hear from you.
How good was that episode? I told you Ally was going to drop some truth bombs, and she definitely did. There was a lot in this episode. So, if this episode got your wheels turning about how a book could actually grow your business, go connect with Ally. Her info is linked in the show notes. Seriously, don't just think about it. Start this conversation today, and definitely check out her mastermind. I would love to hear what your biggest takeaway from today's episode was. Come tell me over on Instagram or LinkedIn, or feel free to comment on any of the posts about this episode. Let's keep this chat going, because you never know who may need to hear your story next. And you could even be a guest. Just reach out. Thanks so much for joining me today. And no matter what it is that you do, make sure you take time to have fun, because as I always say, if you're not having fun, why are you doing it?